African unity. I really hope to keep this relatively short, around 10 minutes short, long. I struggle to keep things short because I just sometimes struggle to get to the point as I'm doing now. So I've wrote questions down that I want to pose to any viewer out there so that we can get this conversation going and hopefully get some action going, at least at an individual level, to hopefully make some ground, cover some ground, make some progress in the pursuit of African unity. I'd like to start by defining unity. And unity is an undivided or unbroken completeness or totality with nothing wanting. Just wanted to put that on record, just to have the definition on record so that people understand to an extent what we mean by unity. But then at the end of the day, it still sounds like an abstract thing, especially when you're talking about human beings. And the first question I want to ask is, what does that mean? What does it mean to achieve African unity? What does it mean to you as an individual? What does it mean to me? What does it mean for our community? What does it mean for our countries? What does it mean for the continent? What does the idea of African unity look like? And that's the first question I think we need to be asking ourselves. Who is responsible for ushering it in? On whose shoulders does the responsibility of African unity lie? Who is it that we're supposed to look at? Who is it that we're supposed to hold accountable for African unity or a lack thereof? And again, it goes back to what does it mean when we look at the continent, when we look at our communities? What do we define as, okay, that looks like a unified Africa? That does not look like a unified Africa. And then who do we hold accountable for that, whether we're achieving it or whether we're not? What can you, or rather, what are you doing as an individual to help Africa achieve unity? After we've asked who is responsible for it, I'd like to believe that each and every one of us, to some extent, have a responsibility, have a duty to work towards the progress of African unity, to work towards the goal of African unity. What are you doing in your workplace? What are you doing when you start a business? When you buy, whatever, wherever you spend your money, whenever you relate to people, whenever you travel, how do you relate to people from within your communities, from outside your communities, foreigners? How do you represent Africa? How do you represent your part of the country, of the world? How do you represent your part of the continent? And how does that contribute towards the idea of African unity? Does your family, your community, your workplace, your business, the province, or even your country, does it have unity? Before we speak about unity on the continent, we're talking about huge square area. We're talking about really massive landmass. We're talking about over 1.3 billion human beings. Of course, some are very young to be able to even comprehend what we mean. Some are very old and perhaps aren't able to contribute towards that idea. But the majority of us are able. The majority of us have a hand to play. And what are we doing within our families? Do we have unity? Do we have unity within our communities? Do we have unity within our workplaces, within our countries? For us to want to strive for unity for 1.3 billion people, do we have unity here within the 100, the 50, the 1,000, the 5,000 people within close proximity to us? These people with whom we perhaps share a culture, with whom perhaps we share language, with whom perhaps we share in economic status? Do we have unity with these people before we now start to diversify further into the vast expanse of the African continent? Does your lifestyle, your beliefs, your activities, behavior advocate for or promote or fund African unity? Where do you buy? Where do you buy your stuff? Who do you talk to? To what do you contribute? When you spend your money, are you spending your money on African stuff or are you spending your money on international stuff? When you see people being xenophobic, when you when you travel, where do you travel? Do you travel within the continent? Do you travel outside of the continent? Where are the place, what are the things that are affected by the activities that you take? What activities do you do that affect African unity? How do you add on, contribute, or take away from the notion of African unity? Maybe you're xenophobic. Maybe you don't like certain foreigners. Maybe you don't buy from certain businesses that are owned by African nationals but not nationals of your country. Maybe you buy from European nationals. Maybe you buy from American nationals. Maybe you buy from the Chinese and you're not buying from people of the continent. Are you at an individual level contributing towards the idea of African unity? Um, do you spend your money on businesses or organizations that fund the AU? What does that even mean? Do we even have businesses that fund the AU? Who funds them? The African Union. That is the body that has sort of been that is sort of leading the charge of us achieving unity as Africans. Who funds them? How do I then patronize the companies that fund this organization so that I can be actively economically contributing towards the general idea of African unity? Is that something that you are doing already? Do these companies exist and how do we find them? How do we become patrons? How do we become clients? How do we become customers to these companies so that we can say we are actively contributing with our money, with our sweat towards the idea of African unity? And do these companies even exist? And when you get a job, when you start a business, when you start making money, are you doing so that you can have the financial muscle to be able to contribute towards the idea of African unity? Or are you doing so simply that so that you can buy a German machine? Simply so that you can buy Italian clothing? Simply so that you can buy a luxury British vehicle? How your mindset, where does it lie? How are you moving? How are you planning your future in relation to the context of African unity? When you are driving your expensive car in a neighborhood where people are probably hungry, where people are probably struggling to get an education, where people are probably struggling to have proper housing, are you in that way contributing towards African unity? Your family, if you're driving such an expensive car that you got to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds on, how much of that money could you have distributed towards among your family, among your community, to help achieve unity, to help achieve progress among these people, so that hopefully that adds up to African unity as a whole? How much do you sacrifice personally so that the continent or the community can have a better future? Again, you go and you spend all that money on a foreign vehicle. Money that you probably could have spent, of course, maybe still buying a foreign vehicle, but a much affordable one, and spending more money trying to help the community, trying to help educate people, trying to help us further trying to help us get further along in our trajectory of achieving African unity. But again, you have to go back to defining, what does African unity mean to me? What does African unity mean to the person next to me? What does African unity mean to the person 1,000 kilometers away from me in a different country? And how do we then move together to achieve a similar goal? Goals that are converging towards a similar idea of what African unity means. What part of you are you sacrificing for posterity? Do we support each other in cases of sanctions? We've seen the international community likes to punish us, or threaten us at least, with sanctions. We've seen it happen with Zimbabwe. They've been sanctioned. The international community has not been willing to trade with them. And this has come after a time when the African Union was born, and we have allowed our brothers and sisters in Zimbabwe to be bullied by the threat of sanctions. What have we done? What have we done to ensure that these people must not go hungry? That, I believe, is the first step for us showing unity. If we're going to say we're united, no one is going to come and say that one must not eat, that one must not survive, that one must go hungry. Fine, you can not feed them, you can try not to work with them, but we are going to work with these people. We are going to take care of these people. We are going to love these people because we are united with these people. But then again, maybe that does not fall within the confines of your definition of unity and what unity means to you on a personal level. But do we support each other? And I guess the last question I'd like to ask is, am I even asking a fair question? Am I even asking fair questions? These questions I'm posing, individual ideas of unity, the individual sacrifices that we need to make, the organizational sacrifices, the organizational moves that we need to be making in order to achieve African unity. Are these even fair questions for me to be asking? Or are some of you maybe just not brave enough to actually be asking these questions, to actually be taking action that adds towards the idea of African unity? Or do we simply not have the balls to challenge the international stage by achieving African unity? Because I think a lot of us do understand what African unity means to the rest of the world. It's a very scary thing for them. It's probably a beautiful thing for us, but for the rest of the world, it's very scary. And that is why we're struggling. It's a big part of why we're struggling to achieve it, because the international community tries by all means to divide us and therefore go against the definition of an undivided or unbroken completeness or totality with nothing wanting. If we were to be able to stop being undivided, stop being broken, and come to form some form of completeness, however it may look, maybe it's different. We have a lot of people, 1.3 billion plus. We have a lot of different cultures, a lot of different beliefs, a lot of different ways in which we live, a lot of different wants, a lot of different hopes for the future. But I do believe that somewhere in there, somewhere within our definitions, there are converging ideas and there are converging sentiments that we can look up to and say, these are the ideas for which I live, and I will pursue these ideas so as to achieve African unity. I'd like to urge you to look at some of the speeches that were recited by some of the leaders in the first meeting of the African Union. At that time, it was called the OAU. That was in 1963 in Ethiopia, Addis Ababa. And also to look at the Agenda 2063 that was formulated back in 2013, that is supposed to help usher us into a united Africa going forward by 2063. That is what we hope to have achieved. And I hope that we can learn, teach each other, and actively contribute towards that which I at least believe is a beautiful future, not only for me, but for all of African posterity. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope that we can have the conversation and just start teaching each other, start talking about it, and start actually taking action towards achieving this. Thank you very much.